The apartment that was rented, but no one lived there. Picture this: an apartment, fully rented, rent paid on time, every single month. No missed payments, no complaints. Nothing unusual on paper. But the neighbors, they started talking. Quietly at first. The kind of talk people have in hallways, voices low, eyes darting toward a closed door. Because something was wrong. Something they couldn't explain. Something that sat in the back of their minds long after they went to bed. Nobody had ever seen the tenant. Not once. Not moving in, not taking out trash, not getting the mail. Not a single face, not a single name spoken out loud. The apartment sat at the end of the third-floor corridor like a held breath. Perfectly still in the daytime. And then, every night, when the building went quiet, it came alive. Footsteps. Dragging sounds. A voice just below hearing. Just enough to wake you up at 2 a.m. and leave you staring at the ceiling, wondering if you imagined it. The cameras recorded nothing. The door logs showed nothing. And yet, the electricity meter ran every single night, like clockwork. Like something in that apartment needed power to do whatever it was doing in the dark. This is the story of Unit 314. And to this day, no one knows who was inside. Veltner Street is the kind of place that doesn't ask questions. It's a quiet corridor in a mid-sized city, lined with apartment buildings that were constructed somewhere between ambition and practicality. The kind of buildings with beige walls and thin carpets, and hallways that smell faintly of detergent and someone else's cooking. Nothing remarkable. Nothing out of place. The Alden Arms building sits at number 42. 6 floors, 38 units. A small lobby with a key-card entry, 2 elevators that hum too loudly, and a building manager's office tucked beside the stairwell on the ground floor. It is, by every measurable standard, ordinary. The building had been managed for nearly 9 years by a man named Gerald Hofstetter. He was methodical, organized, the kind of person who kept binders for everything. Maintenance requests filed by date, inspection logs cross-referenced by unit number, tenant correspondence sorted into labeled folders. He was not the type to panic. He was not the type to imagine things. He was the type to notice when something was off. The lease for Unit 314 was signed in early February. Standard 1-year agreement. The tenant had submitted everything remotely: a scanned application, digital signature, and a bank transfer for the first and last month's deposit. Gerald noted at the time that the process had been smooth, almost unusually smooth. No back and forth, no phone calls, just documents arriving in his inbox, clean and complete, and money appearing in the account within 24 hours. He remembered thinking, good, easy. The apartment had sat vacant for nearly 3 months, and an easy tenant was exactly what the building needed. The name on the lease was listed as M. Carver, no first name written in full, just the initial. Gerald had seen that before. It wasn't unusual. Some people were private. Some people just didn't like paperwork any more than necessary. He filed the documents, issued the key card, sent a confirmation email with the building rules attached, and that was the last communication he ever had with M. Carver. February turned to March, March to April. The rent arrived on the 1st of every month, automatically, without prompting. Gerald had no reason to think about Unit 314 at all. Until the woman in 316 knocked on his office door one Tuesday morning, arms crossed, mouth tight, and told him that she hadn't slept properly in 2 weeks. Her name was Donna Petrovic. She had lived in the building for 4 years. Gerald knew her as a reliable tenant, quiet, punctual with payments, occasionally left homemade baked goods on the front desk during the holidays. She was not someone who complained unnecessarily. So when she sat down across from his desk and told him she had been hearing noises from the apartment next door every night, he listened carefully. She described it plainly. Footsteps. Not pacing. Moving. Deliberate and slow, crossing from one side of the apartment to the other. Sometimes a low dragging sound, like something heavy being shifted across the floor. And once, she hesitated before saying it, a voice. Very quiet, almost below the threshold of hearing, but there, definitely there. Gerald thanked her. He told her he would look into it. He wrote it down in his binder, Unit 314, noise complaint. And he sat for a long moment after she left, thinking about a tenant he had never once seen. Donna Petrovic was not alone. That was the thing Gerald discovered when he began making quiet inquiries over the following days. He hadn't sent out a notice or called a building meeting. He'd simply done what a methodical man does. He walked the 3rd floor, knocked on doors, made small talk, and asked if anyone had noticed anything unusual lately. The responses came quickly, too quickly, as if people had been waiting for someone to ask. The tenant in 312, a graduate student named Paolo Rindel, said he had been hearing sounds through the wall for weeks. He described them as rhythmic. Not footsteps exactly, but a pattern. A low, repeating movement late at night, always starting sometime after midnight. He had assumed, initially, that the new neighbor was a night shift worker, someone who kept strange hours. He hadn't thought much of it until he mentioned it in passing to Donna one morning at the elevator, and realized she had heard the exact same thing. The woman directly below Unit 314, in 214, was an older retired librarian named Evelyn Marsh. She told Gerald that she had been hearing sounds from the ceiling, her ceiling, which was the floor of 314, for as long as she could remember since February. Low rumbles. Movement. She had initially blamed the building's old pipes, but pipes don't move furniture. And she was fairly certain, she said with measured calm, that what she had been hearing on several occasions was the sound of something being dragged. 3 separate tenants, 3 separate locations relative to the apartment, all reporting the same category of sounds, all placing them in the same window of time. Late night, early morning, somewhere between midnight and 3. Gerald returned to his office and opened the tenant file for Unit 314. He stared at the name. M. Carver. He pulled up the email thread. 1 message in, 1 confirmation out. He checked the keycard access log, the digital record that tracked every time a keycard was used to enter any door in the building. He found the entry for Unit 314's card. It had been used once, the day the lease began, February 9th at 2:17 in the afternoon. The apartment door had opened, and according to every log entry after that date, it had never opened again. Gerald read the log 3 times. He refreshed the system. He checked the date range, expanded it, narrowed it again. The result was the same every time. In over 2 months of tenancy, Unit 314's door had been accessed exactly once. He sat back in his chair. The building hummed around him. Somewhere above, a pipe knocked softly in the walls. And Gerald Hofstetter, a man who kept binders and believed in practical explanations, felt something he hadn't felt in a professional setting before. He felt genuinely unsettled. He decided he would check the security camera footage next. The hallway outside 314 was covered by a fixed camera mounted near the elevator. It stored rolling footage on a local server in the basement. Gerald brought up the archive and selected a random date, a Tuesday in March, 3 weeks prior. He fast-forwarded through the overnight footage from 11 at night to 4 in the morning. The hallway was empty. Perfectly, completely empty. Not a shadow, not a flicker of movement near that door. Not a single frame that suggested any living presence had passed through. He selected another date, then another. He spent most of that afternoon in his office, watching empty hallways on a monitor, listening to the buildings settle around him. And every single time, nothing. The corridor outside Unit 314, on every night he checked, was entirely undisturbed. But every morning the rent was paid. And every night, according to 3 separate tenants, something moved inside. Gerald didn't sleep well that night. He lay in his apartment on the ground floor, a unit he occupied as part of his compensation arrangement with the building's owners, and he stared at the ceiling while the building shifted and breathed around him. He was a practical man. He believed in explanations. A door log showing no entry meant either the log was malfunctioning or the tenant was entering through another method. That was the rational framework. He repeated it to himself several times, like a quiet mantra, until somewhere near 2 in the morning he gave up on sleep entirely and went back to his office. He pulled the full door log report for Unit 314. Every entry, from the beginning of the lease to the present date. One entry, February 9th. That was all. He then cross-referenced every other access point in the building, the main lobby entrance, the rear fire door on the ground level, the stairwell doors on each floor, the roof access hatch. Every entry and exit logged by the building's keycard system for the past 10 weeks. The name M. Carver, or rather the card number assigned to M. Carver, appeared exactly once in the entire system. February 9th, lobby entry at 2:14 in the afternoon, 3rd floor stairwell door at 2:16, Unit 314 door at 2:17, and then nothing. The card was never used again. Not to enter, not to exit. Not a single swipe on any door in the building after that first afternoon. Gerald pulled the lobby camera footage from February 9th. He found the 2:14 timestamp and let it play. A figure entered through the lobby door. Medium height, wearing a dark coat, a bag over one shoulder, face angled slightly away from the camera. The image was adequate but not detailed. The person moved with purpose, directly toward the stairwell, without stopping at the mailboxes or the elevator. Gerald watched the figure disappear through the stairwell door. He then pulled the 3rd floor hallway camera for the same timestamp, 2:17. The figure emerged from the stairwell, walked to Unit 314, held the keycard to the reader, and entered. The door closed. And the hallway remained empty for the rest of the day, and the night. And every night after. Gerald burned a copy of the footage to a USB drive and labeled it carefully. He clipped it to the tenant file. There was one more thing he wanted to check. The building's electricity sub-metering system. Each unit had its own meter, monitored by the property management software. Gerald pulled up Unit 314's usage history, going back to the start of the lease. The pattern was immediate and unmistakable. During the day, the unit showed minimal draw, consistent with a refrigerator cycle and perhaps a standby device or two. Standard idle consumption for an empty-seeming apartment. But every night, reliably, the usage climbed. Beginning somewhere around midnight, sometimes a little after, the draw increased and held elevated until approximately 2:45 or 3 in the morning. Then it dropped back to baseline. Every single night. No exceptions. No weekends off. No variation in the pattern. Gerald stared at the graph on his screen for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called the building's owner, a property management company based in a neighboring city. He spoke to the overnight coordinator, a young man who sounded mildly alarmed by everything Gerald was describing, and formally requested authorization to conduct an inspection of Unit 314 under the building's welfare check provision. The authorization came through by morning. Gerald set the inspection for the following day. He wrote the date in his binder, circled it twice, and closed the file. He walked back to his apartment. He made coffee. He sat at his kitchen table and listened to the building around him. Quiet. All quiet. From somewhere above, from the direction of the third floor, he thought, just once, that he heard something shift. The morning of the inspection, Gerald arrived at his office an hour earlier than usual. He reviewed everything one more time. The access logs, the footage, the electricity records. He wanted to be certain he wasn't about to knock on the door of a perfectly ordinary tenant who simply kept unusual hours and happened to use a side entrance Gerald hadn't accounted for. He ran through every possibility methodically, the way he did everything. There was no side entrance to Unit 314. The apartment had one door, one lock, one keycard reader. The windows on that unit faced an interior courtyard, 11 meters off the ground, no balcony, no adjacent structure. There was no physically plausible route into or out of that apartment except through the hallway door. And the hallway door had not been opened in over 2 months. He called Donna Petrovic and asked if she had heard anything unusual the previous night. She said yes. Around 1:30 in the morning. Footsteps. Movement. Same as always. Gerald went upstairs at 10 in the morning. He walked the third-floor hallway slowly, noting everything. The corridor was ordinary. Fluorescent lighting overhead, slightly too bright, and with the faint flicker that he'd been meaning to have replaced for months. Beige walls. A faint smell of floor cleaner. He stopped in front of Unit 314. He knocked. 3 times, clearly, with appropriate force. He announced himself. Building management, conducting a scheduled welfare inspection. Silence. He knocked again. Waited. Nothing. He produced the master key from his jacket pocket, a physical override that bypassed the card system entirely, and inserted it into the lock. He heard the mechanism turn. He felt the resistance of a door that had not been opened in months. A slight pressure differential. A whisper of stale air at the threshold. He pushed the door open. The apartment was empty. Not empty in the way a furnished apartment with an absent tenant is empty. Empty in the absolute sense. No furniture, no boxes, no personal items of any kind. The kitchen counters were bare. The closets, which Gerald checked one by one, contained nothing. The bathroom had no toiletries, no towel, no evidence of use. The windows were clean. The walls were unscuffed. It was as if no one had ever moved in at all. Gerald stood in the center of the main room and turned slowly, taking inventory. He noted everything. Clean surfaces, undisturbed window latches, no smell of food, no smell of habitation. And then, near the far wall, near the wall that separated this apartment from Donna Petrovic's unit. He saw them. Marks on the floor. Faint, but there. Long parallel lines in the dust that had settled on the hardwood. Drag marks. 2 of them, running roughly half a meter apart, extending from the center of the room toward the far corner and then back again. As if something had been moved, repeatedly, from one position to another, and then returned. But whatever had made those marks was no longer here. Gerald took photographs. He documented the drag marks carefully, measuring their length and spacing with a small ruler he carried in his inspection kit. He photographed every room, every corner, every bare wall. He tested the window latches, all locked from the inside. He checked beneath the built-in kitchen cabinets and inside the bathroom ceiling panel. Nothing. He locked the apartment behind him when he left. He stood in the hallway for a moment, looking at the closed door. Then he walked back to his office, sat down at his desk, and wrote a full incident report in his binder. He dated it. He clipped the photographs to the page, and then he called the building owners again. Because whatever was happening in Unit 314, it was no longer just a noise complaint. The building owners responded faster than Gerald expected. By the end of the week, he had received authorization, along with a modest allocation from the maintenance budget, to install a wireless monitoring camera inside Unit 314. The camera would feed to a local recording device stored in Gerald's office, motion-activated, wide-angle, night vision capable. Positioned in the upper corner of the main room, aimed at the full sweep of the space, angled toward the section of floor where Gerald had photographed the drag marks. The installation was handled by a contractor who asked no questions and was in and out in under an hour. Gerald tested the feed from his office. The image was sharp. He could see the empty apartment in clean night vision green. Bare walls, bare floor. The faint lines of the drag marks just visible at the edge of the frame. He labeled the recording device and logged it in his binder. Standard procedure. Everything by the book. The first 3 nights produced nothing. Gerald reviewed the footage each morning, scanning through the overnight hours, checking timestamps. The apartment was still. The motion sensor triggered twice. Once, it appeared, due to a passing car's headlights casting movement through the window, and once, for no discernible reason at all, a single false activation at 11:47 on a Wednesday. Gerald noted both instances. Neither showed anything in the room. On the 4th night, at 12:23 in the morning, something changed. The footage from that night began ordinarily. The apartment sat in the dark, still and empty, the night vision image painting everything in shades of gray and green. The electricity meter, Gerald would check the following morning, showed the usual elevated draw beginning just after midnight. On the camera, nothing moved. Nothing changed. The room was precisely as Gerald had left it. And then, at 12:23, the camera signal dropped. 1 second. Exactly 1 second of black, blank footage. Then the image returned, steady and clear, the room exactly as it appeared before the interruption. Except, in the lower left corner of the frame, near the baseboard, just at the edge of the drag mark zone, there was now a dark shape. Small. Dense. Perhaps the size of a hardback book, or a thick folded cloth. Something that had not been there before the signal dropped. Something that was, without any question, not present in the footage immediately preceding the interruption. Gerald watched the clip 40 times. He reversed it, frame by frame. There was no gradual appearance, no motion blur suggesting the object had slid into frame. It simply was not there. And then it was. In the single second the camera had gone dark, something had been placed, or had appeared, on the floor of the empty apartment. He did not touch the object. He did not re-enter the apartment that morning. He sat at his desk for a long time, hands flat on the surface in front of him, breathing steadily. He was a practical man. He believed in explanations. He wrote the timestamp in his binder and underlined it twice. He then did something he had not done in his 9 years of building management. He picked up the phone and called the non-emergency police line. Not because he believed a crime had occurred, but because he was no longer willing to be the only person who knew about this. The officer who took his call was polite, patient, and clearly uncertain what category of report to file. Gerald described everything clearly. The absent tenant, the door logs, the electricity pattern, the empty apartment, the drag marks, and now the camera footage with its 1-second interruption and its impossible new object. The officer took notes. He said someone would follow up. Gerald thanked him and hung up. He looked at the camera feed on his monitor. The object was still there, small and dark in the corner of an empty room. Not moving, just present. He waited for evening to come, wondering if it would still be there when the electricity draw began again after midnight. Gerald had always trusted data more than instinct. Data didn't exaggerate. Data didn't misremember. Data sat in a column of numbers and told you, with complete indifference, exactly what had happened and when. It was one of the things he valued most about his work. The paper trail, the logs, the measurable record that turned vague impressions into facts. So when the responding officer from the non-emergency call came by the following morning, a tired-looking detective named Rios, who had clearly been handed the file as a low-priority favor, Gerald set him down in front of the office computer and walked him through everything methodically, in order. The electricity records first. Detective Rios leaned forward when Gerald pulled up the graph. He asked a few quiet questions. What time did it start? What time did it end? Was the pattern consistent? Gerald answered each one. Yes, every night. Yes, within the same general window. No, no exceptions in the entire tenancy. Then the access logs. Rios studied the single entry for the key card, February 9th, and said nothing for a moment. Then he asked if there was any possibility of a system error. Gerald said he had considered that. He had run a diagnostic on the logging system. Everything was functioning within normal parameters. All other tenants' entries were logging correctly. Only Unit 314 showed the anomaly. The camera footage came last. Gerald queued up the clip and let it play. Rios watched the room, still, gray, green-tinted. Then the 1-second drop. Then the return, with the object now visible in the lower corner. He asked Gerald to play it again. Then once more. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed the side of his jaw. He said carefully that this was unusual. Gerald appreciated the restraint. They went upstairs together to view the apartment. Gerald unlocked the door with the master key. Rios entered first, unhurried, hands in his jacket pockets, and scanned the room with the practiced calm of someone who had seen a lot of spaces and was taking stock. His eyes went to the object in the corner immediately. It was a small bundle of dark fabric, folded neatly, precise, intentional folds, the kind that suggested someone had taken time and care. The fabric was plain, dark navy or black, though in the camera footage it had appeared nearly formless. Rios crouched beside it without touching it, studying it from several angles. He noted the drag marks on the floor. He looked at the windows, still latched from the inside. He asked Gerald if he had entered the apartment between the night the object appeared and this morning. Gerald said no. Rios stood. He looked at the ceiling, then the floor, then the corner where the object sat. He asked whether the building had any shared utility access points, any crawl space, conduit access, or utility shaft that connected this unit to adjacent ones. Gerald had anticipated this. He had already reviewed the building's infrastructure plans. Unit 314 was a standard mid-floor unit. The only shared infrastructure was a ventilation return in the ceiling, standard for the building, approximately 30 centimeters square. The electrical panel was in a recessed wall cabinet beside the entrance. There were no crawl spaces, no accessible conduits, no passages of any kind large enough to accommodate a person. Rios photographed the object and the drag marks. He photographed the window latches. He photographed the electrical panel. He said he would look into the tenant registration, run the name M. Carver, the bank account used for the deposits, the IP address associated with the digital signature on the lease. Before he left, standing in the doorway of the empty apartment, he looked once more at the neat bundle of dark fabric in the corner. He said, quietly, that in 20 years of police work, he had encountered some things he couldn't explain. He was not saying this was one of those things, but he was noting it. Gerald locked the apartment. They walked back down the hallway side by side in silence. The fluorescent light near the elevator flickered once, then held. Gerald noted it in his maintenance log when he got back to the office. He noted everything. It was the only tool he had left that still felt reliable. The electricity records continued their pattern that night. Midnight draw, sustained. 3 a.m, baseline. The camera in the room, Gerald watched the feed from his office, showed nothing move. The object in the corner remained precisely where it had been, but the power ran, faithfully, obediently, through whatever was using it, in the dark, in the empty room, until just before dawn. Detective Rios called back 4 days later. Gerald had been checking his phone more than usual. He had also been reviewing the camera feed more compulsively than he wanted to admit, pulling up the live view at odd hours, watching the empty apartment breathe in night vision green. The object in the corner hadn't moved. The electricity continued its nightly pattern without deviation. No additional camera interruptions, no new objects. Just the steady, unexplained draw of power in a room when nothing was supposed to be happening. Rios spoke in the measured way of someone delivering a report rather than a conversation. The name M. Carver produced no matching records in any residential database for the city or the surrounding region. No driver's license, no utility account, no voter registration, no prior rental history. The name existed, technically. It appeared in a handful of generic business directories as a listed contact for various small administrative companies, but none of those listings corresponded to a real, traceable individual. They appeared, as Rios put it, assembled rather than organic. The bank account used for the rental deposits was a prepaid virtual account routed through a financial intermediary registered in a different jurisdiction. The deposits had been loaded in advance. The full lease amount, all 12 months, front-loaded as a single large transfer on the day before the lease was signed. The transfer originated from a secondary account, which in turn had received funds from a tertiary account. By the time the trail reached anything resembling a source, it had passed through 4 layers of routing and terminated at an account registered to a dissolved corporate entity. Rios said the financial structure was not illegal on its face. It was unusual. It was the kind of structure associated with privacy-conscious individuals, occasionally with journalists or security professionals, sometimes with people engaged in various kinds of discrete activity that didn't necessarily constitute a crime. He was expanding the inquiry, but had nothing yet that justified a warrant. The IP address associated with the digital lease signature had been traced to a commercial VPN exit node. Another wall. Gerald thanked him. He hung up and sat quietly for a while. He thought about the front-loaded payment. 12 months of rent, transferred at once, before the lease was even formally active. Someone had planned this. Someone had known from the beginning exactly how long they intended to use Unit 314. And they had constructed every element of the arrangement to ensure that no part of it could be traced back to a real human being. Not a person hiding. A system hiding. There was a difference, and it had been bothering Gerald since the conversation with Rios ended, working its way to the surface slowly. He pulled up the building's records for every interaction associated with 314 since February. He read through the digital lease documents again, this time more slowly. The application had been thorough. References, employment history, income documentation, all of it plausible. All of it formatted correctly. He had checked 2 of the references at the time by email and received prompt and professional responses confirming the applicant's good standing. He found the email addresses for those references in his archived correspondence. He sent new messages to both, asking for a follow-up contact. Both messages bounced back immediately. The email addresses no longer existed. Gerald set his phone down. He walked to the kitchen in his apartment and stood at the counter for a moment. He thought about the day M. Carver had entered the building. February 9th. Face angled from the camera, bag on one shoulder, moving quickly and with purpose. He thought about the electricity running every night in a room with no furniture. He thought about the folded fabric in the corner that had appeared in a single second of darkness, on a camera that should not have gone dark at all. He thought about one more thing, something that had been present in the data all along, but that he had not yet followed to its conclusion. The electricity pattern ended each night at approximately 3 in the morning, sometimes 2:50, sometimes 3:05, never precisely 3. Except, he checked the records again, except on one specific date. One night, in late March, the draw had ended at exactly 3:17. The precision of it. Not an approximation. Not a natural taper. A single spike, and then a clean, absolute stop. 3:17. He wrote the number in his binder. He stared at it for a long time, without knowing why it felt significant. It just did. Summer arrived. The building continued its routines. The months passed with a strange normalcy that Gerald found more unnerving in some ways than any single dramatic event. The camera in Unit 314 recorded its nightly footage, the electricity ran its pattern, the door log showed no entries. Rios checked in occasionally with small, inconclusive updates. The corporate trail had gone cold, the name M. Carver remained unlinked to any real identity, and without evidence of an active crime, the inquiry had been deprioritized. Gerald understood. He thanked Rios each time. He kept his binder. Donna Petrovic told Gerald in September that she had stopped hearing nightly noises from the unit. For several weeks in late summer, the nights had been quiet. No footsteps, no dragging sounds. Gerald checked the electricity records and found they matched her observation precisely. During a stretch of approximately 3 weeks in August, the nightly power draw had been absent. The unit had run at idle, refrigerator cycle only, for 22 consecutive nights. And then, on a Tuesday in early September, it had resumed. Just like that. Same pattern. Midnight, elevated draw, 3 in the morning, baseline. And Donna, the following Wednesday, knocked on Gerald's office door again and told him she had heard footsteps through the wall the previous night, for the first time in weeks. Gerald noted all of this carefully: the gap in activity, the resumption, the alignment between the electricity data and the acoustic reports. Whatever was happening in that apartment had paused, and then continued, as if whatever was using the space had simply been elsewhere for a time. He did not know what to do with that thought, so he wrote it down and moved forward. The lease for Unit 314 was set to expire on February 8th of the following year, exactly 12 months after it had begun. As the date approached, Gerald paid attention to everything more closely. He reviewed the camera footage with greater care each morning. He checked the electricity records daily. The object in the corner, the folded dark fabric, had disappeared at some point. Gerald could not pinpoint exactly when. He had reviewed footage going back and estimated it had been gone since sometime in late October, but the exact night it vanished was unclear. No camera interruption that time. It simply appeared in the footage one evening and didn't appear in the footage a few nights later. No event, no moment, just gone. January arrived. Gerald requested a meeting with the building owners and briefed them fully on everything he had documented over the past year. The binder was thorough. The evidence was precise. The owners were quiet during most of the call. At the end, they authorized Gerald to change the electronic lock credentials on Unit 314 as soon as the lease formally expired on February 8th. They also asked Gerald to have the apartment professionally cleaned and prepared for releasing as quickly as possible. Gerald agreed to everything. He wrote the dates in his binder. February 7th, the night before the lease expired. Gerald sat in his office past midnight, watching the camera feed. He had not told anyone, not Rios, not the owners, not Donna, that he planned to stay up that night. He had told himself it was simply due diligence, one last night of monitoring before the tenancy ended and the chapter closed. The apartment was dark and empty in the night vision frame. The electricity had been running since just after midnight, as always. The floor was bare. The walls were bare. The room was precisely as empty as it had been for an entire year. Gerald watched the screen. He drank coffee. The building settled around him. The clock moved through 1 in the morning. 2. 2:30. At 3:17 in the morning, 3:17 exactly to the minute, the electricity meter in Unit 314 registered a significant power surge. Brief, sharp, a spike of consumption far above the usual elevated draw, lasting less than 4 seconds. And then, the power dropped to absolute baseline, lower than idle, as if every draw, even the passive standby current, had ceased. Gerald was already at his computer, pulling up the camera feed to check the simultaneous image. The camera showed the empty room, exactly as before. Nothing in it. Nothing different. Just the bare floor and the faint residual lines of the drag marks near the far wall. But the electricity was simply gone. Completely off. At 3:17 in the morning, on the last night of the lease. Gerald wrote 3:17 in his binder for the second time. He drew a slow line connecting it to the first instance. He sat in the silence of his office for a long time, listening to the building breathe, and he did not have a single explanation that satisfied him. The apartment was cleaned and relisted within 2 weeks. Gerald oversaw the cleaning crew personally. He walked through every room with them, noting each surface, each corner. The drag marks were cleaned away during the floor treatment, the hardwood buffed and polished until the marks were gone and the surface was smooth and uniform. Gerald had photographed them again before the cleaners arrived. He kept the photographs in the binder. The new tenant moved into Unit 314 in early March. A young woman named Sasha Timurova, a graphic designer who worked from home, who had come to view the apartment on a bright winter afternoon and had signed the lease the same day. She was, by every measurable standard, entirely real, verifiable, traceable, fully present. She had waved to Gerald in the lobby on her first morning, with boxes under her arm and a portable speaker playing something cheerful. Gerald changed the camera access log on his office computer so that the Unit 314 monitoring no longer appeared in the active dashboard. He moved the footage archive to a separate external drive, which he labeled with the unit number and the lease dates, and stored in the locked lower drawer of his filing cabinet. He told himself he was done with it. The investigation had produced no conclusions. Rios had filed a summary report citing unverifiable tenancy and inconclusive evidence of unauthorized activity, but without identifying a specific crime or a specific perpetrator, the case was suspended rather than closed. The financial trail remained cold. The identity of M. Carver remained unknown. The explanation for the electricity, the noises, the drag marks, the camera interruption, the folded object and its disappearance, none of it had been resolved. Gerald filed everything carefully. That was what you did with things that didn't resolve. You filed them and moved forward. April passed. May. Sasha settled in comfortably. She occasionally left herbal tea bags on the front desk for Gerald, which he found touching. The building hummed along. The third floor was quiet. The electricity in 314 ran normally. The natural rhythm of a real tenant, varied and human, day and night without pattern. And then, in June, Donna Petrovic appeared at Gerald's office door again. She stood in the doorway rather than sitting down this time. Her expression was controlled, but her arms were crossed and her jaw was tight. She said she needed to tell him something, and she hoped he wouldn't think she was being dramatic. Gerald said nothing. He waited. She said that the previous night, sometime around 2 a.m, she had been awakened by a sound from the apartment next door. Not from Sasha's side. Sasha was quiet. Gerald knew this. From the other direction. From Unit 312, which was Paolo Rendell's old apartment, now occupied by a couple who worked days and went to bed early. The sound, Donna said, had not come from 312. It had come from below 312. From the apartment that shared the wall between units on that side of the corridor. Gerald looked at the floor plan in his mind. 312 shared the corridor wall with 314. Donna had heard footsteps, just a few, slow and deliberate, moving across a floor. And then silence. She had lain awake for an hour afterward and heard nothing more. Gerald thanked her. He told her he would check the logs. He already knew what the logs would show. Gerald checked the door log for Unit 314 that same afternoon. No entry, no exit. The new tenant's card showed a normal pattern of daily comings and goings, Sasha leaving mid-morning, returning in the afternoon, occasionally out in the evenings. The apartment itself, the unit's own lock, showed only Sasha's entries and exits. Nothing else. Nothing anomalous. The electricity records for June showed the normal variation of an inhabited apartment. No nocturnal pattern. No midnight to 3 draw. He checked the camera. He had removed the monitoring device months ago, during the cleaning. There was no feed to review. He pulled up the hallway camera archive for the previous night. He watched the corridor outside 314 from midnight to 4 a.m. Empty. Still. The fluorescent light near the elevator, which he had finally had replaced in March, burned steady and constant. Not a shadow, not a motion. Nothing. Gerald sat with the footage for a long time. He was familiar with this feeling now. The absence of evidence that was supposed to be evidence. The gap where an explanation should be, and simply wasn't. He thought about M. Carver. He had thought about M. Carver many times over the months since the lease had ended. He had constructed several theories, none of them satisfying. A test of some kind. An experiment in automated tenancy. Someone studying building management responses. An elaborate staging operation for reasons he couldn't identify. A technical malfunction, producing ghost data that only coincidentally aligned into patterns. He had turned each theory over carefully, the way he turned every piece of documentation, looking for the seam where it held and the seam where it didn't. None of them held entirely. Not one. The electricity data was real. The acoustic reports from 3 separate credible tenants were real. The drag marks were real. The camera footage, including the 1-second interruption and its impossible consequence, was real. The financial architecture built specifically to erase every trace of a real identity was real. And the power surge at 3:17 on the final night of the lease was real. He had the meter data saved in 3 separate locations. Real things had happened. He simply did not know what they meant. Gerald closed his laptop and looked at the binder on his desk. It was thick now. A full year of careful, methodical documentation. Photographs, logs, correspondence, meter readings, camera stills. The record of something that had rented a space, used it in ways no one could observe or explain, and then ended precisely on schedule. Like a task completed. Like a project concluded. He thought about that. About the precision of it. Everything in M. Carver's tenancy had been precise. The timing of the lease, the front-loaded payment, the entry and the singular use of the keycard, the nightly schedule, reliable and consistent, the departure at the exact expiration of the contract. And 3:17. Appearing twice, months apart, in the electricity record. The same minute. Not random, not approximate. Intentional. But intentional meant someone had intended it, and someone meant a person. And a person could be found, eventually, if you looked in the right places with the right tools. Gerald picked up his phone and called Detective Rios. Rios answered on the 3rd ring. Gerald told him about Donna's report. He told him about 3:17 appearing again in the original records, and about the fact that he had never quite finished drawing the conclusions from it. He said he wanted to go back through the data from the beginning, more carefully this time, and he thought Rios might want to do the same. Rios was quiet for a moment. Then he said he had been thinking about the case too. He said there was a federal financial intelligence unit that had expressed peripheral interest in the account routing structure. He said it might be worth a call. Gerald said yes. He hung up and looked out his office window at the lobby, where a resident was checking mail, and where the afternoon light was doing that low-angle autumn thing it did in this city. Cutting through the glass at a slant, making everything look briefly significant. Somewhere above him, on the 3rd floor, a door opened and closed. Normal sounds. Sasha, home from an errand. The building breathing. The ordinary rhythm of real life filling the spaces that needed to be filled. But somewhere in Gerald's binder, between the electricity graphs and the camera stills, the number 3:17 sat on a page in blue ink, circled twice, connected by a line to its twin. And no explanation, not yet, not ever fully, arrived to account for it. The case remained open. The apartment was occupied. the hallway was quiet. And somewhere in a system of routed accounts and dissolved entities, and a dark coat disappearing through a stairwell door, M. Carver remained exactly as they had always been. Unknown, unlocatable, and perhaps, in some way that Gerald could feel but not articulate, not entirely finished. The world is full of secrets waiting to be uncovered. Make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and join me as we explore the stories that hide in plain sight. Some of them might haunt you.